Hi there. Welcome to A Creative Affair, a collection of conversations exploring creativity through the art of photography and other creative passions. I'm Bree. I'm a nature photographer and life coach to other passionate creatives. I absolutely love helping others change their mindset so they can stay motivated and achieve big goals. It's the best. I was raised in California and spent many years in the eastern US, and now I live in Texas. And I love it, love Texas. But one of my favorite places is a really lovely small black sand beach in Costa Rica. And I dream about it all the time. I'm going to go back.
Oh, wow. Sounds wonderful. When am I going? I'm Len, a professional educator in Sydney, Australia. I started teaching as a teenager, a young teenager, in Scouts, actually. I started teaching knots and map reading, sailing, camping, abseiling. Teaching is something that ties my life together. I'm totally addicted. I love it so much. I get so much pleasure from it. I can't stop. It's my profession. And I've been doing it to earn a living ever since leaving school. Bree, did you know that I've studied teaching in so many forms? I'm a high school art teacher. I've got a master's degree in adult education. I've even taught at university adult vocational education. I've taught people to be teachers. And I just absolutely am passionate about teaching. And of course, I love teaching photography and creativity. Well, enough of that. And today, we're going to talk about one of the important elements when we are being creative. The hands-on part of being creative, which really is so much about what this podcast is about, isn't it? As how do we be creative? That's the big question for us. And today we're going to talk about play, being playful, being experimental, being childlike. Well, Bree, what are your thoughts on play?
Well, as you were talking, I was thinking, yeah, we're just even doing a podcast. Like, it's so much fun. And like the feeling I have when I'm experimenting and playing is like, how can I have fun? Right? So I can actually, or we can save it for later. I can talk about some of my thoughts about play. But first, actually, I love play. And this week, since we discussed talking about the subject, I've been trying to wrap my brain around what play is like for me. And what it's like is really just going out and experimenting with my own art, but also I think play also happens in our minds. Like right now, I'm also playing with some ideas about some new ways to explore my work in like some different ways that I never even thought of before. And so I also think, so we can go out and, we're nature photographers, so we can go out, right? Or, whatever genre of photography, Len, you do all kinds of things, right? But, even if you're a painter, what does that look like? I'm a musician and you've been a musician. And I think once you're a musician, you always are a musician, right? And so what does your play look like? I own a ukulele and sometimes I just get it out and mess around and just kind of goof around and play and have fun. And that to me that is the core of what creativity is, and it's like why we want to do it, because it's the play and experimentation that's really fun. So how about you?
Oh, don't you just love that idea of messing around? I love that idea. And just giving yourself permission to mess around, to experiment, to try things. play is such a beautiful metaphor for creativity for me. And when I try to put myself into a playful mindset, I'm really giving myself permission to be silly, to mess around, to be experimental, and to take huge risks, and to turn off that really goal-focused, really mindful, not mindful, that's the wrong word, totally focused artist working on something. There's moments where I want to step away from that.
And that's where, like, we've talked in the past couple of podcasts about goals and about projects, and this is kind of like the opposite of that, like the complete opposite. It's like dropping all of that and just allowing yourself to experiment and not have any goals in mind or any idea of what you might do, right? Because I think if you go to do your art and you're thinking, I'm going to do exactly this, I think that seems like it takes away from some of the experimentation. I do have to say, though, sometimes I walk outside. So one of the ways that I've been playing is with clouds and trees and how they work together and some of their silhouettes. And I kind of like them together. And so sometimes I'm like, ooh, the sky looks really interesting. And I'm like, let me just go and see what I see, with kind of the idea in mind that I may want to experiment with that, but also because that could work against me, but also just kind of, if I leave myself open to the playfulness, then I can just kind of let it all go and say, even though this is what I want to try, I'm also leaving myself open to anything else that I see that could be interesting, or anything else that may pop into my mind while I'm playing around doing something else.
So it's really a balance between an idea, sometimes a goal, sometimes a bit of a focus, and then experimentation and going off and seeing what can be done. And we're going to keep returning to this notion over many podcasts, I'm sure, but what do we have going on in our minds, and balancing them all out so that we can be effective as artists. Now, one of the reasons that play is so important to us is that play is the way that we learn. I want you to go back to thinking about children, how we learnt as a child, or like I'm lucky enough to be a parent, and Bree's a parent too.
4 times over.
4 times, amazing. That's absolutely amazing. How do children learn? And what is the purpose of play? Now, the sort of a widely held belief is we go to school to learn. But we actually watch a child take their first steps, or standing up, or looking at something, or seeing things. They're being incredibly playful. They're experimenting. They're taking risks. They're trying things to see what happens. They're making, perhaps we could call them mistakes, or we could reframe that into learning experiences, aren't they? We don't have to say the word mistakes. We're trying to figure out how things work through this experimentation, through being playful, without having major restrictions thrust upon us, or told how something should be. And I think this is the key element, is why play has to be tied with creativity so strongly, is it's a means of being creative.
Right. Well, and when you were talking about being childlike, I was thinking about my kids, and when they were young, or giving them a bunch of paint and seeing what happened. And like the finger paint where they could just make whatever, that's getting your hands in there and getting messy. But also like Play-Doh, some clay, giving kids clay and giving everyone the same lump. And it's all the same material, but everyone makes something different. One kid might make a really tall, long something, and another kid might make teeny tiny, intricate, like people. Or I have one kid who's over 20 and he still makes out of clay, like with his hands, just little cute animals, right? Just giving yourself, starting with something like just something that's nothing almost, right? But having these ingredients, right? Like my ingredients are like the sky and the trees, and going out and saying, what do I do with this? Like, what does that look like? What if I do this? Or what if I do this? And maybe that's part of the play too, is asking yourself all kinds of those questions. For me, it's like the what if, right? Or
yeah, exactly. What if? And I love the metaphor of the paint and the clay, and it's a really good one to think about. And us as adults with the kids, when we put the paint out, is one of control. Oh, we don't want the paint on the carpet. We don't want it on their faces. No, you're not supposed to eat the paint. And we want to get in there and teach them, and this is what a house looks like, and this is what we paint. Or clay is the same thing. Like, oh, this is how you make a pinch pot, or you've got to get the air out of the clay, et cetera, et cetera. And yet when I've taught all of those things, I remember, I actually have a very specific memory here. I remember people, adults, and giving them a lump of beautiful clay for making pottery. We used to do sawdust firing on camp and all those sort of things. And being the art teacher, I always got, hey, Len, you go and run the art studio today instead of the abseil cliff sometimes. Anyway, these people would have their fingers squeezing the clay through their fingers. And I remember this one lady, she stood there for 2 hours squeezing the clay through her fingers in this absolutely beautiful visceral thing. And I'm like, oh, why don't you make something? And she's like, I'm actually just enjoying the feeling of the clay and understanding how it moves and works with. And I mention that because of my expectation about making a pot and or making a figurine or making something with it. And she was just being the most incredibly playful and being in the moment. And I am so jealous of that ability just to switch off from that end goal. Of, oh, here's the raw materials, I have to make something. And it's so much about this is about being in the headspace that gets rid of some of those restrictions that really bind us and pull us back in. I think one of the big problems, and I'd love you to comment about this, is so much of life and schooling actually knocks some of this creativity out of us, in particular with expectations and boundaries, and this must be what should be done with that. Have you encountered something like that where society gets in the way or our expectations get in the way of play?
Is that like a rhetorical question?
Yeah. Oh, no, it's not rhetorical. I'd love you to tell me about it.
Well, yes. I mean, whenever we have some sort of expectation of what something needs to look like, then we have an idea, right? Like the pinch pot or the figurine. We have an idea of what the end product is going to be. And then we what happens is we subconsciously assign our brains to go and do that. And so then we go on one track to head that way, and we don't allow ourselves the opportunity to go on any other different tracks, which is kind of the opposite, right? It's the opposite of creativity, because because it's limiting. It's a limiting thought that we have to go out and we have to do this one thing. Okay, but I want to say something too, and we're both photographers, so I don't think it's a big deal if you make a plan to do something very specific. That's awesome, right? That's like a goal or a project, right? Like, I'm going to go and I'm going to do this, right? But when we're in kind of a situation where we get so like one track focused, then that limits our ability to open ourselves up to other possibilities that could be even better than the end goal that we have in mind, right? And so having that kind of limiting thinking is really like the opposite of play. And I was just thinking, like, while you were talking earlier about the clay, like, everyone thinks that, okay, wait, not everyone thinks. Society thinks that making the figurine is the creativity. You're so creative because you produced something, right? You produced a photograph, you produced a piece of music, you produced a piece of artwork, or a beautiful poem. But what if the creativity part is, that's just producing something, and the creativity part is just the actual playing with it and the squishing the clay in your fingers part. And that's the creativity, is just getting to know what you're working with. That's all part of it, really letting it become part of you, right?
So this actually brings up this question about, again, as to what creativity is. And it's such a broad spectrum from making something, could be at one end of it, and being playful and experimenting could be maybe at a different end of the spectrum. And sometimes we're really focused on making things and we're having clear goals, and we can be creative in that process. And other times we can be totally experimental and see what actually happens. I've watched Shirley Steele when she wanders around taking photographs, and she's an abstract photographer. And sometimes it's really focused. And other times I've seen her walk along the beach just waving her camera on, just to see what colours there are and what happens, and having this incredibly beautiful, playful moment. So I think there's room for both ends of that spectrum. But I think you're exactly right that creativity for me is about trying to be unique, about doing things that maybe haven't been done before, or seeing the world in a different way, rather than making that pinch pot that is up to expectations and is measured against a set of criteria, and making the perfect pot that performs really well on Instagram or those sort of things is less exciting to me than making something that's really interesting or new and very, very different. So I think that's a lovely thing.
And I have a little sticky right here that I wrote earlier today. It just says, let go of perfection. Like, just let it go. Because what does that look like anyway? Is there going to be a perfect pinch pot? Are you going to get the perfect whatever you have in mind? And you also said before that playing is learning. And part of some of the downsides to having a specific expectation, is we don't allow our minds, when we say this is what we're going to go do, and maybe we learn some things on the way, but we're not, I think when we release those expectations, then we can actually exponentially expand our learning, because we open up. That's why we want to open up so much possibility, because we don't actually know what we don't know. And when we allow ourselves to experiment and play around with things, that's when we get those, like we talked about in our a few episodes ago. we talked about having those aha moments, right? That experimentation is when we have that aha moment, and we can have multiples of those, so many of those, if we just allow ourselves to kind of be free. But can we talk about the risk-taking part? Because
Yeah, of course we can.
because that is actually the really scary part to me, is the risk-taking. And what are we even, because so here's what I told Len. I said, Len, you're the expert. You're the expert in play. But so is this a good opportunity for me to put in some of what I'm going through? Okay.
Brie, I really want you to, because we had a really beautiful conversation before we started recording, and we're going to come back to that right now. And yes, it is the right moment to tell us about, why are you scared about being playful? Is that, can I call it that way? Or maybe you should put it in your own words rather than
I
mine.
will. I don't think I'm actually scared of playing, but there is a little bit of risk. And I think that involves, here's the risk. Okay, so when we decided to talk about this, I immediately thought in my head, oh, Len is here. So here's the thing. I'm just going to be open about all of it. And because I want to say, if I'm thinking this way, then other people are too. And 3 years ago, I would never have talked about this to a public audience, but I don't care now. And so, and also this is the part of the risk taking that I'm fine with. So when we talked about this, I immediately thought, I'm not good at that. Legitimately, I was like, I'm not good at playing. What is that? I'm not good at playing. I'm not good at experimenting. And I actually told that to myself multiple times. And so here's the thing. I'm a life coach and I coach my own self. And so I had to sit down and actually coach my own self, because whenever I hear the words, I'm not good at something, it doesn't mean I have to be the best, but I want to sit down and look at that and say, what does that even mean? What is being good? What does being good at experimenting even look like? Right? So, and everyone's right now thinking, well, you don't have to be good at experimenting. Right, of course. But that's what came to my head is, I'm not good at experimenting. I'm not good at playing. I'm not the expert, right? Who's an expert at doing this stuff? Okay. So here was my process was, I had to actually identify that that's what I was thinking, right? And when I was thinking, I'm not good at experimenting, I was feeling really nervous. I was picturing myself talking about this. I was picturing myself doing, going out with my camera and just playing around and being nervous. And why? Because I think I'm not going to make something that's good. And that's part of the experimenting is who cares? And so that's why I had to ask myself was, who cares? So when I was feeling nervous, I'm like, why am I so nervous? And when I was feeling nervous, then here's what I was doing. I was finding all of the evidence of why I'm not good at it. And I was also telling myself, I don't know enough to just go out and play. And then I was also remembering, one of the things that I told myself was, this is part of my evidence, was I'm well, isn't playing, if you're a chef or a cook, part of the fun of what you do is playing with your food and putting it together in all kinds of different ways, right? And so I was well, I'm a recipe follower. So if I go in the kitchen, I follow a recipe. Yeah, Len did not hear this part, right? So I was well, I'm a recipe follower. Right? So isn't there a recipe for photography? Isn't there a recipe for making a pinch pot? All of this stuff. Isn't there a recipe for that? Right? So I'm thinking, right?
Yeah, there is recipes for photography. There's recipes for art. There's recipes for success on Instagram or even for business. And music, there's the score. And we could even see that as a recipe, or the conductor. could also be the holder of that recipe telling us in the orchestra how to perform
Right.
and steering us into a particular direction. So
Oh,
the world
oh
is
yeah.
full of recipes and expectations pushing down on us, aren't they? And they become part of this limiting belief that's blocking, isn't it?
Right. And here's the secret with that, Len, is the only thing that pushes on us is our thoughts about what anyone else expects of us, or what anyone expects out of our art, or what we expect out of our art. And so it's all our own expectations that we think other people have for us, which that can be really limiting, because who knows what other people think about what we do. But in
We're
my
creating,
case,
oh,
yeah.
we're creating limiting beliefs, aren't we?
Yes,
we're
exactly.
putting pressure on ourselves, saying we're not creative. We're putting up a block. I'm not playful. I'm not experimental, and it becomes a wall.
Yeah.
And it really gets in our way, and we need to reframe that and change that and become really comfortable with it, don't we? We have to.
Right.
We have a big shift has to come from that.
So let me tell you how I shifted. Because I think it's really helpful to also provide a solution, because I've shifted in my mind since then. And after I thought I'm a recipe follower, then I was like, okay, so what if I am? So what if sometimes I follow a recipe? So what? This is the question that actually helped me. So the secret actually, here's what I did. The secret actually is I had to sit and ask myself, and this is where I made the switch. I had to ask myself, is there a way in which I do play here, that I'm not following a recipe and still really having fun? And yeah, I make these things called one pot wonders, and I just open the refrigerator and I see all the ingredients, and I take like 5 out, and I chop them all up and I put them in the pan, and every time it's different, and you just never know what you're going to get. And so I totally am experimenting every time I do that. And so I had to find evidence for that. And then I also had to remind myself that I don't need to know anything special to be able to do this. Because honestly, Lynn, I think I was comparing myself to you. You've been doing this, for years, so many more years than I have. But I've also been experimenting for years too. It's not just about photography, right? And so I had to remind myself of that. We're all experimenting. And also the comparison part also limits you too, right? When you're comparing yourself to other people. So that's what I had to knock out of myself. I was like, oh yeah, that's why, because I'm thinking he's such an expert, and I'm not. And why am I not an expert at play? I can totally do that. And so and then I was also reminding myself, oh yeah, I'm also thinking about so many new things to play with. I haven't tried them yet, but I have so many ideas going on in my mind, some new ones about what I want to do. And that's also play. So anyway, that's how you can shift, is just ask yourself a question and find some evidence for which you, in ways that you actually do that thing. Because our minds are always trying to talk us out of doing the risk-taking stuff. Because it feels risky, but it's not really.
Yes, very much so. And Brie, I have to tell you that being an artist and enjoying or being experimental or taking risks, it's an attitude that you take with your whole life. And it's something that I really love. When I was young, give me a cliff to climb up, and risk taking actually was a badge of honor, and it still is. But a part of that still, for me, is still learning to be playful. And I still have to consciously pull myself out and remind myself that I can be, give myself permission to do it, and keep learning how to be playful. It's not something that's just a matter of just switching on and letting go of everything. It's something that I continually revisit because it's so easy to fall back into the recipes. And I often think of my photography as a process of problem solving, and I'm figuring out solutions. So I'm photographing a tree and I figure out a way of doing it that I love. And then that becomes a recipe and it falls back into my subconscious, and I keep pulling those bits of recipes out, and it becomes safe and becomes predictable. And I have to then stop myself and go, right, well, where's the next that I can go without keep falling back onto the recipes, so that I can experiment and come up with a new way of doing something, or a more creative way, or a unique way, or a different way, or really a more Len way. And because it's so deeply personal to me. So much of this is in that attitude, and it's a lifelong learning thing. I really don't think that it's something that we fix and suddenly we get there. I think that's something that we can always actively remember to come back to. I'm hanging on to my recipe, or I'm hanging on to my goal too much. For me, overstating the goal and making it too restrictive becomes a problem as well. And I've had to learn those lessons throughout my life.
So I have a question for you, Len. So you're an educator and a mentor, and I know you've worked with a lot of students to kind of help them be in this space where they can play and they can experiment. And what does that look like? Like, if I was to fly to Australia, hope I can one day. If I was to fly to Australia and I was like, Len, teach me your ways. What does that look like for you with your students?
Oh, that's a fascinating thing. And of course it looks different for each person, because each of us have a different blocks. And you know this as well, that when you're working with people, we have to figure out what works for them and find things that suit them, and the things that are going to work for them. But so much of that is actually slowing down and being more present with whatever you're working on, being creative with, and giving yourself permission to let go of those really, really strong goals and expectations, and spend more time being playful. Actually, I studied with Freeman Patterson. He's a Canadian creative photographer, and he's the most gorgeous, beautiful old man, and I love spending time with him. And one of his exercises is stand there and photograph without moving. Like, stay in that spot, and part of it is a degree of randomness in that spot. So he actually chooses the spot to put you in. Stay there and photograph there for the next 2 hours, and don't move your tripod, or see what you can find, experiment, go beyond the obvious, take risks.
It sounds like if you're doing that, because at first you could say, oh, but that's his recipe, right? To make me stand there and, do that. But it's really allowing you the space in your mind to let go of, releasing your own expectations of what has to be, and also just focusing inward a little bit. I think if we're still, like you said, slow down. I even have this on a sticky. I'm grabbing it right now. It says, slow down, tell the story of the moment, and let go of clarity. And like, what does
Yes.
that look like? And so slowing down, I can see how slowing down in any art that you do, even if it was like if you were picking apart 5 words, if you gave yourself 10 words, if you're a writer or a poet, 10 words, what could I do with those? Right? Like, so allowing yourself to just slow down. And then I think the process of that helps you actually, like, physically, like even right now, as I'm thinking about it, my shoulders are dropping.
Yes,
And I'm feeling a little bit more present in my
that's
in
right.
my body. Right?
Your breathing changes. You're
Totally.
becoming calmer. I've got a really good question to ask when you as you're settling down into this is, what if? What if? What will that look like? What if I do this? What happens when I move there? What will that look like? What
Yeah,
happens
and
when I change my angle? There's so many what ifs to experiment, rather than jumping to that one that has that recipe or that clear goal, because we hang on to those paths that we know that are successful. Yeah, we
or
do
that we
things,
think are, right? That we're
That's
like,
right.
oh, that's how I've done it before and I like it, so that's how I should do it again, right? And
Yeah, and we
certainly
keep
we
repeating
can.
it.
Yeah. Yeah, and we can. But is that so fun? Is it all
Well,
the time? I
No,
don't know.
it is. It becomes boring. It becomes predictable, doesn't it? And
Yeah.
our life and our art becomes incredibly predictable. What it's like, having a really predictable style too, or a predictable look. It becomes really boring. Fantastic artists keep changing throughout their life and growing. They're blossoming off in so many different directions. So it's such an opportunity to go beyond and become something else.
Yeah. I was just thinking too, like, what if I went out? Another what if? What if I went to go practice my photography or whatever, and I just asked myself 20 times, what if? What if I ask myself what if until I've exhausted everything, and then I ask myself like what if 5 more times? Because that's the digging in and really like, oh, what if this? What if that? Once we get rid of like the first 10, then we're getting into places that we've never asked ourselves about before, I think. Because, I can go outside and go, oh, what if this? Yeah, okay, I've asked myself that before. Oh, what if this? Oh, what if this? But you do that 20 times, I think I might be asking myself something completely different and learning some really great, amazing new things, just because I'm allowing my mind to just kind of wander and have all the fun with its own experimentation, right?
I'll give you a really good example from photography. Is that professionals tell us that we should take less photos. That being a good photographer means walking up and only seeing the best photograph, taking it and walking away. And yet, for me, and what I would teach and encourage others to do is not to worry about how many photographs you take, to totally immerse yourself in being playful and give yourself permission to experiment and take as many as possible. And ask this question, what if, what if, what if? It's a letting go of visualization, isn't it? It's this huge experimentation. I think playful is so much about letting go.
Yeah, and this isn't something we need to practice or we have to practice all of the time, for sure. You can do this 100% of the time that you do whatever, I could do this 100% of the time I do photography. But maybe I don't, maybe sometimes I want to, and maybe sometimes I want to do kind of the preconceived thing. I went to my creek the other day, I saw some mist rising and I'm like, I know exactly what I want to do. I grabbed my camera, I ran over there and I'm like, okay, like beautiful. It's kind of something I've been waiting for because I pass it all the time. And so when I see, and then once I did that, then I allowed myself to play, like got what I wanted. I allowed myself to play some more. But here's my question for LA. I have another question for you, Len, is when we kind of get in that, like, oh, this is what I do, what then, like, how can we remind ourselves to kind of get out of it? Because it is easy to get stuck in that, right? And we can talk about getting stuck in a rut and what does that look like later. But like, if you want to kind of get out of what you're currently doing and kind of break free from a little bit, what do we need to be doing?
Oh, I think that's a beautiful question. And again, there's so many different answers to it. But for me, sometimes I have to do the obvious. Sometimes I have to take the obvious photo, or, if I'm skiing, I go and ski the obvious line first. And then I become more playful and experimental. So sometimes fulfilling what it is that I have a need to do first then allows me to step away from that and go somewhere else with it. What's coming up here is a child, when they're being childish, being childlike, not in a disrespectful, childish way. I mean being childlike. One of the things that they're incredibly good at is following their thoughts and feelings, their interests. They're in tune with their emotions. Vicky talks about her son, and she says he speaks without a filter. Now, isn't that just so beautiful that you can just flow out with what it actually is that's grabbing your attention? And I think being playful very much is following whatever it is that captures your attention. Oh, I wonder what happens down there. What's down that road? If I don't take the path that's forward, sometimes we have to go past. I notice this when I'm driving a car and I see an offshoot and I'm going somewhere. So I've actually got a destination in mind and I see an off-road. I can look at my watch. Yes, I've got time. And then I go down and I turn around and come back and then drive down to have a look. And so then I'll actually stop that path of that clear destination to go down and experiment down some of these side roads to see what's there. And when I'm following my emotions without these limiting beliefs, these thoughts that's stopping us from following our feelings, that's when I find myself being the most creative and feeling the most playful, the most risk-taking.
And we should clarify Vicky as your partner, or currently.
Yes.
She's lovely. While you were talking about, the kids and being childish or childlike, and I was just thinking, kids have the most fun. Like when I remember watching my kids when they were little, and they had the most fun. They're like, hey, what did you do today? I'm having fun, And so, they don't have like some sort of idea about, right, like the recipe that they have to follow. They really are truly just messing around and having fun. I have a good friend, her name's Colette, and she says, I'm just going to try stuff. Like that is her new motto. And she's actually like a graphic designer and she's a life coach too. But she says, I'm just going to try stuff. I love it. I just decided it doesn't matter. I'm just going to try stuff. Nobody else cares but me. So I'm just going to try stuff. And I love that attitude. Like, who cares? I'm the only one that I'm the only one that should care because it's my art. Right. And, if it's business or whatever, we can do what we need to for that. But when it's yours and you have this, like you said, this emotional, personal connection, just follow your emotions. allow them to take you wherever, because they're yours. And it doesn't really matter. I also have a little sticky. I like making stickies. I have some really good ones that stick to everything so that they like actually stay up. So I have one here that mistakes can be beautiful. So with the risk taking, if we're worried about making some sort of mistake, it's not really one. They can be really, beautiful. And I thought about, with Len, you and I chatted about this too. You can go on my Instagram and see. I was in the Nevada desert, and I had my camera, and I must have pressed the shutter button as I lowered it to my side. And when I didn't know I did it. And so when I uploaded all of my images to my computer, I was like, what is that mess? Oh, that's a mistake. I should just delete it. And then instead of deleting it, I went back and looked at it again, and I looked at it closer, and it has the most beautiful colors in it. And I thought, this is definitely a mistake, but it's definitely really beautiful, and I love it. Like I posted it to my Instagram. I called it unintentional camera movement. And that is one way you can play. I mean, who says that a mistake is really one, right? Like, and those can be the best way to discover things.
So I love that idea that there's no such thing as a mistake. And actually, I never delete a photo, and I leave my judgment for them for a year or two before, and I keep them. But that's another whole thing that we should talk about in depth at another time. I had something to come back to. One of the things that is a reoccurring theme in this is that we all have the ability to be playful. We all have the ability to be creative. And one of the things is we need to recognize how to get into that state sometimes because it's a block. But I think it's also incredibly helpful to notice that we actually are in it quite regularly, and that we actually use a playful, childlike states in our life regularly. Daydreaming is one. And I can think of nothing better than lying in bed, closing my eyes, or even looking out the window and letting my mind wander off into things and coming up with ideas, or designing books or exhibitions, or thinking about how I'm going to teach something, or an idea to talk about in the podcast. And that wandering of the mind is being playful. When you were cooking and you were throwing everything into the pot, that was being playful. And so we are so often in this playful mode, and we don't even realise that we're there. And we leave it going back in and out of consciousness, I suppose, or distractions with the rest of our world, that it's really worth asking ourselves, how do we know when we're there, and what does it look like, and reminding us that we're all able to get there. We all can be playful. We can all ask that question, what if, once we start to let go of the control that our conscious mind does to our actions so often when we're being artistic, doing things.
Yeah. And even if we think our minds have, we're so set on something, if we just even start asking ourselves, what if, we'll start to release some of those things, and we'll do the slowing down process, right? So we can get to that. So we can get to that place. I like to, like you wrote in our notes today, following your interests. You wrote following feelings, but following interests. And so, like, what is interesting to you? Go outside, go outside and just look around. What is interesting? And then follow that idea, and take yourself deeper down that thing, like, or what is, if you're a painter, what is your favorite color? Like what is a color you don't use? And how could that be interesting? How could you play with it? Or, you know what I mean? How could you take, and I mean, I am not a painter, which is why I'm a photographer. One reason I'm a photographer, but there are so many different ways we can play, but thinking, what am I interested in? And then going with that and just taking that one thing like the clay and just going down that path.
Following our interests is so important. For me, that's what creativity is about, is actually discovering who I really am. And this journey and being playful, allowing your mind to go in unrestricted areas to see what happens, I discover who I am. And so following interests is so important. Our loves become our muses, our hatreds can, and our triggers can actually inspire us to do something about it, or to create reactions and act on things. Yes, feelings and interests are so important as an artistic process. I think, and something that's really worth trying to see what happens.
That's interesting that you say that about finding out who you are, and all of a sudden I feel like this just got really deep. But I think it's in the process of, this is about the learning. This is the learning part that experimentation takes us to, because experimentation is a really interesting phenomenon in our mind where we don't have anything necessarily planned to tell our minds what to think. We're just allowing like all the thoughts and emotions to come to us. And that can actually be one of the risky parts, is being vulnerable like to ourselves and allowing all of those things to come up. And I think that's how we actually learn so much about ourselves. That's how I've learned a lot about myself, because when I'm out and doing the experimenting and I'm just I open the floodgates. So I just open the floodgates in my mind, and it's not all the things that I'm thinking are not necessarily about my work. It's about I could have something pop into my mind about something about myself that I'm really learning. And so interesting. I guess we just made this into, like, if you want to really get to know who you are, open yourself up to experimentation and play. Go have fun. But the huge benefit is you're going to learn who you are, and that will actually allow you to be more vulnerable later, and you'll have more fun doing the play because you'll know yourself better. And it's just kind of a big cycle, don't you think? Like,
oh, it definitely is. It actually, I have a trigger that's gone on, or a little brainwave as we're talking here. When I was younger, and I was using the outdoors as my tools to teach people environmental things, community values, communication, those sort of things, leadership. I was a member of the Experiential Education Association, and it was a philosophy that we used that life and the outdoors and living actually is an educational tool. And it's such, the realization was like, oh my God, I'm doing this with art as well. And I never really put my thought on it. I'm also thinking about a book on my shelf here about counselling, which is called Life is About Living in Process. I can't remember the name of the book, but living as a process, thinking about things as an educational loop where we do something, we stop afterwards and we reflect on it and think about what it means and what it gives us, and then that influences in terms of making plans or making rules, or in generalizations, maybe is another way of saying that, or solutions to problems that we actually remember. And then that influences how we approach things off into the future. So being playful, being experimental, living and living life to the fullest in an artistic sense as well as every other sense, actually is a way of being on this path of continually growing as an artist. And therefore, when we grow as an artist, our artwork grows with us. We don't actually need to worry about our art as much as we are all focused on. Like we're focused on the product, on making that pot or that musical performance or that
Right.
figurine or the photograph or the drawing. And yet it's the journey that we're on that we absolutely love. And it's actually an educational cycle.
Yeah. And Len, you put a quote in our notes here that I'm looking at.
Oh, okay.
You
what
said,
did I say?
sometimes we write quotes. We write quotes in our notes. Sometimes you get them. Sometimes you don't. It just depends on if we remember to look at them. So this one says, it's from Gottfried Benn, and it says, whoever wants to understand much must play much. That kind of says, so that really says so much about why we want to do the play. And we've talked about some different obstacles to play and actually the doing of it and how you get there. But why we want to do it is whoever wants to understand much must play much. And I have a quote I'd like to share. It's from Guy Tall. I might be sharing a lot of Guy Tall's because I'm reading his books right now. He says, I really love this. The creative journey can be approached as an epic voyage into uncharted waters, because we've talked about taking risks, right? So an epic voyage into uncharted waters, or as a leisurely stroll within the safe boundaries of a city park. And then he says, chain me to the mast. Right? Like, you want to go on an epic journey to uncharted waters? Like, what is that going to look like? And I think that's the play part, So chain us to the mast, take us to the uncharted waters. Let's go let's go learn some stuff, right? Through this play and experimentation. I can't think of anything better and fun to do.
There's such a special part there about also within the safe boundaries of a city park. Giving ourselves to be playful just in moments as well. We've got to be careful that we don't set ourselves up with this huge expectation sometimes, because to get to that, we also have to become comfortable being in that space. So that conversation we've just had about identifying when you're there, everybody knows how to get, everybody has experienced it. We all have learnt to get to where we are. So we've all have this ability to be playful. We always have moments of being playful in our life. We also need to practice getting into there quicker and really enjoying being separated from some of the things that have become blocks for us. And building up slowly. So in his quote there, he has baby steps as well as the jump off the cliff one. And let's go flying and see what happens. And I love that there's room for both. And yet I still love the excitement of the really big ones. But in practice, it's so many of the little ones. Just building up and seeing what happens. The other day, just finding a flower, and it was a rare orchid, and I found one, and I searched the whole area, and I still only found one flower, and I had to keep coming back to the only one that I found, and keep playing with it visually. Experimenting to see what I could do, and I'd go off and then come back because I was searching for more. And then I start with the obvious photo, and then eventually I get to being playful and trying to create something new and a little bit different for it. A different way of framing that is I'm trying to do justice to the beauty that I found there as well. So my being playful with it and experimenting and taking risks is also a way of getting to know it and trying to explore it and understand what is going on in there for me and for that subject and what it means to me.
So maybe part of the playfulness, because we've talked about play and experimentation. So maybe part of that too is also exploration, right? Like taking the epic voyage. But,
Oh, yes.
you know, yeah, right. Like doing the exploration and asking, how do I do this? What is interesting about it to me? And how do I, and just, I think in general, if we could ask ourselves some more questions instead of and doing it that way, instead of to help reframe ourselves, I just think we'll end up being naturally playful when we get really curious and we start asking ourselves, like we even haven't even said anything about curiosity, but the what if really is the curiosity. So, and kids are, you're right, naturally curious. My kids all got in all kinds of trouble, right?
Oh, rule boundary pushers, rule breakers, were they?
All of them. Oh, except the first one. But
and
yes.
Isn't that part of it? That's
Yes.
such an important part, is breaking the rules, pushing boundaries, seeing what will happen, breaking things to see what happens.
If you even think there are any rules in relation to, art that we're talking about, right? Because so much of what we see out that when I'm looking at, you just showed me some work earlier, I'm like, that's a thing I wouldn't even know, because and we're going to talk about inspiration in a different episode. We talked about like 3 different things we're going to talk about. This podcast keeps getting longer and longer. But like just opening yourself up to the exploration, and not even, if you had said, what if there were no rules? Then what does that look like? So,
yes.
That's part of the risk taking. We think we have to work within a certain boundary, and that could be so fun. So,
It's fascinating how we keep coming up with more topics to talk about as we're talking about things. And that's why this is a conversation, isn't it? It's about exploring and seeing where it takes us.
Yeah.
Such a beautiful thing.
It is. Well, Len, this has been a really fascinating conversation. I actually learned a lot. And I came into this knowing that I wanted to share some things and then ask you some questions too. So thank you so much. Like, you taught us some things today. I appreciate it. And I hope all of you learned a lot about playing today. And by the way, I'm encouraged to do more play after this conversation. So we have questions for you. Do you play with your art? Do you play? Just do you play? And if not, ask yourself, why not? Is it one of these things is it like the thing that was blocking me last week? Is it one of the other things that we talked about could be a block for you? And we invite you to explore that if you aren't doing a lot of play. But if you are playing, why not do more? Why not get extra curious and see where that takes you? And what are you also learning from your experimentation and exploration? So, but either way, whether you're doing it or not, or wish you did more or not, we just invite you to always have fun with your art, because that is what we're about, right? We're about having fun. And with that, we are having so much fun doing this podcast. I am having fun having these conversations, but we also invite you to keep the conversation about your creative passion flowing by engaging with us and with others. And you can email us at creativeaffairpodcast.com if there's anything you'd like to converse or share with us. Well, you know what I'm saying. So today I gave you a small example of how, through my own personal coaching myself, but it's a small example of how I teach my clients to change their mindset about anything they're stuck on. I teach my clients these skills just so they can have them for life, because this is how I want to be able to change my own mindset and feel better about what I do. So if you're interested, you can go to creativemindscoach.com. Links in the show notes. And you can sign up for a discovery call to find more. And I really think it's the best investment of 30 minutes you could make this week. I mean, why not? You want to change your mindset? Come chat with me.
And it's free.
Yeah.
And I can vouch for you. I learn so much in this conversation each time we get together making this podcast. I also love how well, we started with fun and how playful it is. And we believe that that's very much a part of creativity is being fun, and how important it is having conversations. So, yeah, have one with Bree. Have one with me. I would love to talk to you as well. And did you know I published Len's Journal? It's the most beautiful printed limited edition quarterly journal, and it's only available to subscribers. We sell off the end of the print run, but if you've paid up when the edition gets printed, that's how many we get printed. It celebrates creativity in photography so beautifully. As I started off with, I'm an absolutely passionate teacher, and my life really came together when I bought my art, which is a photographic art, together with teaching, and turned it into one. And that's when school came together. And teaching photography really is my career and my absolute passion, presenting to people and watching them grow and change. I have over 100 hours of videos over at lensschool.com. And if you actually live anywhere in the world, you can join in when I teach online and delve into so many things that I've talked about in the past. And there's a whole lot of my articles there as well for you to read. Anyway, as always, links to everything are in the show notes. Or please visit us at acreativeaffairpodcast.com. You can follow us on all the major podcast readers, and we do encourage you to do so. We encourage you to tell your friends and extend that conversation even further. So please follow us. Well, Bree, thank you. What a wonderful conversation that we've had today. Please enjoy. Have fun with your gorgeous photography. Do you know she shared a private photograph was like made up of an artwork of a collage of ripped pieces from another artwork. I actually can't wait to see how that inspires you to make some art. Well, for now, it's really time to say goodbye. Bye.
Goodbye. Talk to you next time.